again and who enjoyed last night, and we are very happy to welcome Dr. Dean Gersun to be our special guest tonight and to share some of his stories, about what he does there, and some really interesting things I think we'll all be listening to tonight. And a big thank you to our dear friend Mike Gersun, who's actually a family member of Dean, a cousin, and our cousin, who the three of us, we've got a little group that helps look for good speakers. So thank you, Mike, for suggesting that we ask your cousin to join us tonight through the lockdown learnings. Over the last year and a half or so, we've hosted so many different speakers, and you learn so much from all the different people that share with you their particular wisdom, their stories, their life journey. And I think tonight we're in for a treat. You were actually referenced last night by our guest, Howard Saxton, and he said to make sure to ask you a question, which you'll address later, I'm assuming. But he asked us to ask you to tell us the story of the zebra in Glen Hazel. So we look forward to hearing about the zebra in Glen Hazel in due course.
Okay, so thank you.
Oh, we've lost you. Or is that me? Dean, are you with us?
Rabbi, are you there? Oh, there. I am. I'm frozen. Was I frozen, or could you hear me?
Yeah, it's probably your internet connection might not be so strong at this.
Yeah, but there's a hamster and a horse on the wheel outside that are busy pedaling. But sometimes when they break for water, the internet gets a bit dodgy. So it's got nothing to do with Bris Miller, but I always grew up in a house, lots of animals. My mother kind of runs animal charity, and on a WhatsApp group of different farmers and animal rescue. And during lockdown last year, there was a zebra past Pretoria who was hand reared because his mother died at birth, and they needed a place for him, and the farmer couldn't afford to keep him, and they put him on this group, and they were worried that people were going to hunt him because he was an easy target. And so during lockdown, we went with a vet who darted and tranquilized him, and I had nowhere to put him. And we couldn't cross provincial lines because it was lockdown. So we brought him there was an empty house in my street in Glen Hazel. I asked a friend. So we had a zebra and 2 donkeys and a horse in Glen Hazel, which is like the Caulfield, I guess. And he lived in Glen Hazel, and it was the best thing for my kids and for kids in the area. News spread quickly, and there was press and interviews and newspapers there, and that we had a tame zebra in Glen Hazel. So he lived for about a year with us, and he stayed in Glen Hazel, and every day we had feeding, and it was an interesting opportunity for us to learn the halachas of, well, we had donkeys there. So first of all, animals on Shabbos and donkeys on Shabbos. Then second of all, the halachas of kilayim, which is breeding between forbidden species. You can't breed a horse and a donkey. So what we had to do, because we had a female horse and we had 2 male donkeys, we had to look up on that as well. And the third thing was we were trying to look if we could do a mitzvah of Pidyon Petem Rechem Pete Chamor, which I've always dreamed of doing, which is redeeming a firstborn male donkey from a kohen with a sheep. So we had a very educational experience, and Baruch Hashem, we found him. A friend of mine has a big farm near the Vaal, which is like a river about 45 minutes to an hour from here. So he's on the Vaal with the 2. We found him a nice resting place, and we go about once a month to visit him.
Oh wow, what a story! I wonder how.
So that's I'll show you. I'll say I'm trying to think. I wonder if I could share my screen. I could show you some pictures of him, but I'm just not sure. You'll probably see a million Bris photos while I'm looking for them. So I'd probably better not to do that. I might end up on the FBI's most wanted.
So I want to just firstly just let everyone know that if you do have questions as we go through the chat tonight, please feel free to post them in the chat function. And Dean's happy to answer any of those. But for those of us who don't know you, Dean, of course, I put a little bit of a bio on Facebook. But if you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are today, and
okay,
context about your career.
Okay, so I'm 36 this year. I live in Johannesburg with my wife and my children. Born and bred in Johannesburg, went to King David Linksfield, which is like the equivalent of, I don't only know the Sydney schools, Masada or Mariah. What's the equivalent of King David in Melbourne?
Mount Scopus College.
Mount Scopus. Yeah, secular Jewish school. And became religious towards the end of my high school career, a little bit of a mix of B'nai Akiva, of Osamayach, of Chabad, and didn't go to yeshiva, went straight to medical school and got married in my internship, which was when I was 24, and my wife and I saved for 3 years, and we took off 2 years after my community service. I was burnt out. I worked in a trauma unit and ICU for a year, and in my last year, when I was 24, I met Rabbi, and I always knew Rabbi Sushal from Santon. We were there spending a Shabbos, and my wife said to him, "Why don't you ask him to teach you bris milah?" I was doing a lot of circumcisions at the hospital where I worked, so it made sense to do this. And obviously, my wife was my guide. I mean, the shaliach from Hashem to tell me, because this has taken over my life. So I went and asked him if he would teach me, and I went with Rabbi Sushal probably for over a year to all the brisim. And then I went around the hospital. I worked at Joburg Gen as a community service officer. They don't offer circumcision routinely in newborns in South Africa, only at later stages. So I went and offered free circumcision to anyone in the hospital. And we lined them up on a Sunday. Rabbi Sushal came with me. We did them all together. I then went to live in Israel, end of 2012 till 2014, and that's where I learned in yeshiva, and I learned bris milah with 2 separate moilem, and it was unbelievable, the best thing ever did. First of all, to meet the Torah giants and moilem that are doing, sometimes 9, 10, 11, 12 brisim in a day, and you're running in a taxi in a car in between brisim. And it was like living sometimes in the world 200 years ago, where all like the most hardcore Hasidim and Yerushalmi are having brisim at 9 in the morning, and you're having wine and cholent and chicken schnitzel and rice for breakfast. I had that for breakfast for like 3 months every morning. That was going flashik at 9 o'clock, and everything was in Yiddish. My Yiddish isn't great, but my teacher spoke, both my teachers, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Fuchs and Rabbi Yehuda Baum, both of them spoke fluent English, Hebrew, and Yiddish. So kind of learned what was going on through them. Came back in 2014, started specializing as an ENT on the Joburg circuit, which involves Joburg Gen Hospital, Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto, and another hospital called Helen Joseph. Started off, nobody wants to use the new moil, even that you're a doctor. Nobody wants to use you, and everybody waits usually for their first son. That's their first bris. I was quite lucky, though, that I've done a lot in the hospital. Just to give you context, my first son, Azrael, was my 13th bris, only number 1-3. And by the time 2 years later I got to my next son, Yehuda, and Yehuda was my 250th bris. Wow. So around there. So the first 50 were really hard. Nobody wants to use the new moil, even though you're a doctor. But slowly, I've got a lot of parasitol for the people who use me, especially the top 10, the first 10. And the first one is actually a big chesed. His name's Rabbi Vadia Sofer. He told me he listened to a share by Rabbi Pesach Krohn, and he heard that Rabbi Krohn, his father died when he was young, and he became a moil, I think, at 19 years old. And nobody wanted to use him. And he heard of the hardships of Rabbi Krohn, and he phoned me up and he said, "Listen, I know you're learning bris milah, and if I have, I'm having twins, and if we have a boy, I'm going to use you." And Baruch Hashem, he had 2 boys. So those were my first 2, and it was in 2010. I just had my 10-year bris anniversary.
And how many brisim do you think you've done since then?
I've got that all on record at the base end, but probably around 1,000 in 10 years. But the first 2-3 years, as I said, I only did a couple of hundred, and then it kind of spiraled out of control. I think a big reason, well, first of all, bris milah, there's only 4 of us in Joburg, 2 Moelem who are probably in their 60s, and 2 of us who are in our 30s, but there was no Moel who qualified There was no male who qualified in the past 30 years, I think, in South Africa. So it was quite a journey. Something else I wanted to say about that, but I can't remember now.
Going back a second to your hospital,
yes.
hospital before you decided,
yes.
were those people who are Muslim background? Why were they doing bris milah?
No, so none. So South Africa, yeah. So South Africa, so it was medical circumcision and mainly for problems of the foreskin. So South Africa, the healthcare, as you know, there's public and there's a private, and public's not the greatest, and only the bare minimums get done. So you don't really get to choose, elective stuff such as a circumcision. So the ones I was doing in hospital were for people who had like infections of the foreskin or foreskin that couldn't be pulled back, etc. Then later on, what happened is there was a massive study that showed that there was a 70% reduction in HIV transmission, as well as penile cancer and various other health conditions with circumcision. So now our country en masse does circumcision, mainly of young boys, probably from the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, because they don't have the resources. Well, they don't have the resources. Newborn circumcision is usually done in hospital, and they don't have the resources to do that. So it's usually done in older kids and an outback, and you have to be much more skilled to do a newborn circumcision. Much smaller, much more delicate organ that you're dealing with. So now there's massive circumcision clinics across the country from that STD and HIV point of view. But the only adults I really do now are Gairim or converts for the Beth Din, and a few people who like get referred here and there. I'll put them. I do. Some people call me an ENTP, ear, nose, throat, and P. And so at the end of, so I have done before like sinus surgery and the circumcision on the same patient, tonsils, adenoids, grommets, and circumcision on the same patient. So I'll just put them at the end of my list.
Wow. And just interesting is because someone just sent me a question. Do you find the Muslim community, because there's a big Muslim community So when I moved I'm at a hospital called Netcare Linksfield Hospital. It's one of the private hospitals here. And when I moved here, there was there was an old pediatric surgeon who subsequently left. But I had Bris, the grandchildren of 2 of the pediatricians here. So they asked me if I would do the circumcisions for the hospital. So we have quite a big birthing hospital here called Linkwood. So I actually do probably at this stage more non-Jews than Jews. And we see now circumcision across the board is now like a choice. Where in previous communities that wouldn't, like Hindus, Afrikaners, English. But I do a lot of Muslim, a lot of North African, and then just Italians, Portuguese, Lebanese, people who wouldn't previously circumcise their kids. I've been doing a lot of them. We usually do it on day 2 or 3 of life before they discharge from the hospital, or they come into my rooms. And I actually had to put up a sign in my room saying like circumcision clinic, because they often would arrive at the ENT's office and think they were at the wrong place. There's an ENT here in Melbourne, Dr. Gordon. I don't know if you know who that is.
I don't know. Yes.
He's also a Moyle, so it's interesting,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. You must put me in touch with him. I didn't know that there was another ENT Moyle. Okay, good.
Yeah, I'll connect the 2 of you together.
Please do. Can maybe make a society, just the 2 of us, ENTP society.
Yeah, there's also another guy, Dan. There's two Dr. Gordons who are both ENTs, who are also do Brisim. I think Dan Gordon does Brisim as well. But the one
interesting. Yeah, there's a Moyle that I'm in touch with sometimes. There's a few international there's a few international societies and WhatsApp groups. So there's one, Herschel Goldman. I don't know if you know him.
Herschel does a lot of Brisim.
So I speak to him. Actually, I was meant to go. There was a family in Joburg that most of you probably as ex-South Africans know the context here. Thank God we're a strong traditional community. But as Rabbi Beryl Wine says, we're probably 20 years behind America in assimilation and unfortunately, and secular practice. And there was one thing, like that people was always a given that people would have a bris milah. But unfortunately, we're finding now that there's a lot of people, not a lot, but there's probably 4 or 5 who I'm chasing at the moment, who have opted not to have bris milah, and some who are even opting not to have circumcision, which is very, very surprising. Often it depends if they intermarried on the non-Jewish dad's side, if he's circumcised or not, if they want to match or what they want to do, or some people just don't care, unfortunately. So often if there's a family, everybody has a family member who is connected, and happens probably every month, you get a panic phone call from a cousin, an aunt, or a parent. My family they don't want to circumcise their child, they don't want to bris their child. So usually I'll go to the hospital, go wherever they are and go and chat to them, not mention bris milah at all, but just talk to them about medical circumcision, and kind of, by the way, say to them that if we're doing a medical circumcision, I do my medical circumcision the exact same way I do my bris milah. So tell them that they can get both at the same time without having to do anything. Most of them, it's the fear of the unknown. We don't advertise it, but there are even certain situations where we'll use local anesthetic with injections, in cases where we need, we'd rather have the child bris than not. So the reason why I met Herschel Goldman was that there was a family in South Africa that was the case. Their cousin phoned me, they weren't going to have a bris milah. I went to the house when the baby was born and chatted to the parents. Most of the time it's fear of, the unknown. They see it as a barbaric ritual that's primitive. And if you try to tell them that, I always tell them that you need to make the bris medically, cosmetically, and halachically perfect. And when you tell them those 3 things, they usually feel at ease. And I'll tell them, we can do the bris in the bedroom, which I've done before, in the bedroom, on the patio, on the roof, wherever they want to do it. If they want to do it in the hospital, if they want to do it in my room. So I've got a little suitcase that I carry with me, and I can go anywhere with it. I'll tell you a story just now, follow with the story of a bris in a restaurant on the beach in Dubai. But the reason why I met Herschel Goldman is that this family immigrated to New Zealand, and they were going to fly me out. I did their first son, and their second son, they were going to fly me out to New Zealand to do it, which would have been nice because I would have gone via Australia to see my sister, but it would have been a big mission. And then they found out that I would have possibly got into a lot of trouble going to New Zealand and not being registered. And, in South Africa, you can schmuggel a lot of, things like registered health-wise and as a doctor. But so she wouldn't come. And then I actually phoned Herschel to ask him for advice. Someone suggested him. He, as far as he told me, was the only registered mohel that has a medical license to practice in New Zealand, because there's no mohel in New Zealand. So he gets a temporary license for when he practices and flies in for a day. So I managed to organize him to substitute for me, and he went to do that bris in New Zealand for me.
Amazing. So you've done a lot of bris. I mean, I've been to a lot of bris with him as well.
Did you see there was, I don't know if it was the Chabad Shaliach or someone in New Zealand had to be taught by or did his own son's bris because they couldn't get him because of lockdown. They couldn't get anyone in.
No, I didn't.
I think it was in New Zealand. I taught a guy over Zoom to bris his child in. It helped that he was a doctor, but I taught him basic crash course in Hilchos Milah and how to bris his son in Barbados, the Chabad Shaliach. Not Barbados, Barbados, in the Caribbean. They couldn't get someone in to do a bris, so I taught him over Zoom the difference between a circumcision and a bris and how to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's pretty full on. There's also a Rabbi Greenbaum who actually did. We had one son born in Melbourne, so he did the bris here. But you find, I just want to focus on a couple of quick things that you mentioned.
Sure, pleasure. I'm quite ADD, so my train of thought goes all over. So you might take me back to an old story or a new story.
No. What you said is very relevant, because it's definitely a lot more pushback for bris these days. People are
yes.
not, as you said, they may not understand it, or they think it's barbaric and not giving their child a choice. So it's good that you raised that. And if you could just repeat what you said to give, maybe to give parents a bit more confidence and what they should be looking for to ensure that they feel comfortable with their mohel?
Okay, so you want some, well, I mean, first, people just want to know, A, that you care and you're going to be there for them. That if God forbid something happens, they can phone you any time of day or night and you're going to come out, and there's not going to be any reluctance or they want to know that they're in, I think, good hands, that you're going to be there for them, and you show them that there before, that they can phone you anytime, day or night, whether, you know, Shabbos or not. That is the second of all, they want to know that that you're competent as a mohel and that you've had the correct training, and also that the bris is going to look good and the aftercare is going to be parent friendly. So it was an amazing thing that I was a mohel. I mean, 10 years ago, I only started my ENT practice about 3 years ago, but it prepared me a lot for dealing with Jewish mothers and dealing with patients that they want to know that you're there for them and it's going to be safe. So I always tell them 3 things: that I make my bris medically, cosmetically, and halachically perfect, and also that when I'm doing my bris milah and I'm doing my circumcision, there's, besides like the brochas and a couple of other things which we don't need to touch on, the basic gist of it is that it's the same. And, you know, a mohel who's not a doctor, who's been doing it for years and years and years, would be much more experienced than you. You know, and just because you, I say it both ways, just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you're actually a good mohel, and just because you're other way around, an experienced mohel doesn't mean that you're a good mohel. So I guess you'll gauge it from
References.
From references from your rabbi and from your friends, what's going to happen. So yeah, medically, cosmetically, halachically perfect, and that you're always going to be there for them. And even 6 months down the line, if there's a problem, they can phone you.
And how do you answer personally, you know, when people say to you, oh, we looked up medical journals. I see the Chazan asked the question about it being medically healthy, circumcised. How do you as a doctor respond to such a claim? That
so you can push. There's a lot of, like, you get anti-vaxxers. There's a massive anti-circumcision movement. If you look on the internet, and a lot of them target Jews and Muslims, but also with like terrible caricatures and what Jews do and how they mutilate and brutalize their children. But there's the medical evidence is there. It's not hard to find. If you don't have a foreskin, you can't get cancer of the penis. You can't get HPV, which is the warts that cause cancer in a male and in a female, cause cervical cancer. And there's a 70% less HIV transmission rate. And that's taken away from any of the infections of the foreskin or the trauma that kids have. And I do a lot of circumcisions probably on 2, 3, 4-year-olds who now have like infections of the foreskin. And it's extremely traumatic for them now, because, you know, they're experiencing the unknown and the pain and the aftercare. When you do it straight as a newborn, the kid doesn't even know about it. The healing is in 3 to 5 days, and they don't remember it, and it's done. So there's the medical evidence is there, but I often see there's a few local moms groups, non-Jewish ones, General Gauteng or South African groups, where people post on. My wife shows me, I want to circumcise my son, who should I go to? And before, people are ridiculous. You know, the internet gives anyone a platform, and they will comment on, how can you mutilate your son? I got told an amazing stat the other day. This was coming from a midwife who was anti-circumcision. She told a patient of mine that 1 in 4 males who is circumcised becomes a rapist. So that's what the amazing statue said. So I was so angry. I actually called up. So you're saying the court of the Jewish community and the court of the Muslim community are rapists. That's what you're saying. And I told her where to get off and, you know, stop spreading the libels. She must keep her opinion to herself, because that wasn't a medical opinion. And they asked her a medical opinion. It was a midwife that said that, yeah, maybe in Australia you'd get in trouble. South Africa, you can say what you want.
Do what you want. Obviously not a halachic talk, but some people have, someone sent a question, and obviously you would be probably the best person to answer this on this platform. But
yes,
someone was saying, you know, obviously you, as you mentioned, you can be a doctor, you can be a rabbi.
Yes.
Someone wants to know, what makes someone a kosher mohel?
Okay, so kosher mohel. So kosher mohel is someone who keeps Torah and mitzvahs, and has learnt the halachas of bris milah. Now, it's quite precise why we're different. So there's a few things that are different, but the most important one is that the whole foreskin has to be taken off. Medically, each doctor has a picture in his head how he thinks a circumcision should look. There's no medical amount for the shiur, or the measurement of how much must be taken off of the foreskin. First of all, a moil needs to learn the halachas of how much to take off and to measure, because if you don't take off enough, and I see it often in converts or people who had a circumcision done, not a bris milah, not enough was taken off, and you sadly have to revise that and take off more, which can be quite traumatic. So the first thing is the amount to take off. Second of all, in medicine, you want it to be no blood whatsoever, usually when you're operating. Here in bris milah, with the different psukim, but amai chayi, you shall live through your blood. Bris milah, it's very important that there is dam milah, that there is blood, that it does bleed. Obviously, you don't want it gushing, God forbid, and that, but you do want there to be dam milah. And then there's a second part which you don't do medically, which is there's the first part, which is milah, which is the taking off of the outer skin. Then there's an inner skin on the inside of the foreskin called the priya, which is a membrane, a soft membrane, which you have to tear and push back. And if you don't do that, it's not kosher bris either. And the third part is metzitza, which is a way of drawing out blood from the wound. And if you don't do those three things, it's not arguably, sometimes at least two of the three, but mostly three, it's not a kosher bris. So you need to be there are certain situations, we say b'diavad, or after the fact, if they were bris, you'd have to ask your local Rav if they were circumcised by a Jewish person and they took off enough, and he did have intention to do it as a bris, not a circumcision. It could be that it's a kosher circumcision, but each case needs to be judged its own merit.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm sure a lot of people understand that. So the title of this talk was, in fact,
yes,
unlikely place for a Brit Milah. So
yes,
I'm sure you've had a number of interesting places that
sure.
And you've told us, obviously, you may have landed up going to New Zealand. You didn't go there, but sounds like
yes,
all over the world as well.
So it's weird. So a lot of people do want a doctor moil, just makes them feel better. But as I said, there are some moilim are much, much more experienced and better than myself. So I don't think that just because a moil is not a doctor doesn't mean that he should be excluded. Both my teachers in Israel, who are superb and have much more experience than me, were both rabbis who I don't even think have a matric, like a school qualification. But they're superb, safe moilim.
Rabbi Shane, he did our first time in Bris. We lived in New York, and he has done something like 20,000 or some.
Exactly.
He's done.
Yes. I actually met him. I met him in Crown.
I think it was interesting. I don't know. We can talk about that later, but I'll get to it. Anyway,
so a lot of people want a doctor moil. So a lot of the first place I traveled was to Dubai, and the reason was there were a lot of South African expats living there, and it was actually hashgacha, or that's how would you translate hashgacha? Divine intervention, divine providence. That a South African family living there found me and said, "Will you come and do a bris?" And it actually turned out that before, I think at their 30-week scan, it actually happened to be a girl, not a boy. But they still recommended me to a British family, and the British family flew me out. My wife Lauren came with me. As before we had any kids. This is probably about 9 years ago, and we flew on a Thursday and came back on a Sunday night. And it was it was interesting because it was at a time where there were Jews there, and there was still, though, an underground movement. There was no publicity that there were, people weren't publicly showing that there were Jews, and we went to do it. We did it in a flat. It was actually a Shabbos bris, which brings up a whole lot of multiple complications. But it was on the main one was that it was on the 42nd story of a building, and we had to walk there. And so I had to actually leave there was no Ava, I had to leave clothes there because in a fire, that feeling when you open an oven and the heat that comes out from when you open it up was like that when you walked out the door of your building midsummer in Dubai. And had to change my clothes when I got to the Bris. We did it on a Shabbos morning on the 42nd story, different halachic shilas of getting in a lift with a non-Jew and hinting to a lot of shilas asked. Did the Bris there and came home on the Sunday night. The second time, which was the most interesting time when I went, there was a Jewish doctor who was imprisoned and prisoned without a trial, Professor Karabas, in Dubai. And I got asked, I was studying Israel's in yeshiva, it was 2013. And I was asked while I was in Jerusalem to come and do a Bris in Dubai. And there were a few reasons I was reluctant. The first one was because he was in jail. I was worried what happens if there was something against me there that I'd done in the first Bris. And when I get into the country, they're just going to arrest me. Second thing, I was in Israel, so how was I going to get there? And the third thing is my passport had a massive Israeli student visa because I was in yeshiva and kollel there. So the guy said to me in Dubai, had a funny accent, he said, "Where are you staying?" I said, "I'm in Jerusalem." He said, it was a Sunday, I think. He said, "I'll meet you for coffee tomorrow." He flew in from Dubai and met me at a small coffee shop in Jerusalem. And he took me to his car and he showed me all his different passports. So he was working in Dubai for the Israeli government. So this is like 8 years. Only now we've, heard of the Abraham Accords, that there's peace between agreement. But they were working for the Israeli government through the US Embassy. So they worked as front companies through the US Embassy, and they were doing business there for Israeli companies in Dubai, but through the US Embassy. So he assured me that we'd be fetched from the plane and there wouldn't be a problem with the visa at all. And there wouldn't be any problems with traveling. And my wife and my parents weren't very happy about that. And you have to fly via Jordan. And he even told us, he planned and booked our airlines. Apparently, so you go from Tel Aviv to Amman, Jordan, and Amman, Jordan to Dubai. And he told us even that there were 3 ways to get there: Jordan, Ethiopia, and Turkish. And he told us airway. So he told us not to fly on the 2 because the 2 of them fly over Iranian airspace. And if the plane, like everything was calculated, if the plane had to go down in Iranian airspace, it would be a problem getting us out. And so we flew on Air Jordan, and he said there were a lot of Israeli businessmen who did it. It was a common flight, Tel Aviv, Amman, and Amman, Dubai. And so we flew to Jordan, and it's like a half an hour flight, not even, from Tel Aviv. And when you get there, you see like all the planes leaving, all those places you see on like CNN and Sky that have been bombed in like ISIS wars. You see planes like going to all these different places. So we flew from Jordan. It was like a 4-hour flight to Dubai. And true to his word, we got picked up by a golf cart at the airplane. My wife and I, my daughter Esty, who was a few months at that stage. And we got taken through passport control, no questions asked. Got our passports taken away and given back in stamps. So we did have protexia, and then he put us up in a nice hotel. And the thing I'll never understand is he was still very secretive about, there was no mention of like Israel or the embassy or home, or like, he was there on an Argentinian passport and his wife on some European passport. And I'd never know why we should have, it was still secretive there. We should have done the Bris in a flat, but where did he choose it? Like in secular Israeli style, to do it in a beach restaurant, like on the Palm Island. So he said to me, I mean, I've got pictures, the most picturesque venue, secured by the US Secret Service. So the ambassador was there, and the embassy security secured the Bris so no one came. But you can imagine all these Filipino waitresses, they see me setting up in the corner of the restaurant thinking like I'm going to give a talk or something, and then we tell them we're going to circumcise a baby in the corner of the restaurant. There was unfortunately no kosher food. We brought our own food with us, but did a Bris in this restaurant in Dubai. And the amazing thing that happened is one of my cousins, Michael's brother Jared, who's listening, he had his baby in Sydney at the same time, and he flew my wife and I out and my daughter Esty from Dubai. So we did like a tour. It was basically Tel Aviv to Jordan, Jordan to Dubai to Sydney. Yeah, coming back was like a nightmare, 28 hours, like door to door, as I'm sure you guys are used to traveling too far apart. So we came and did my cousin's son Bris in Sydney as part of that, and then flew all the way back. And they say mitzvah gorerit mitzvah, one mitzvah causes you to do the next. The next time we went to Dubai was actually, there was a shul and there was an established community. There was no links between Israel yet, but there was kosher food, and there was a the sultan or the sheikh, I can't remember which is the difference, but they knew about the shul and what went on. And the same people who originally flew me out to Dubai actually moved to Singapore, and then they then proceeded to fly me out to Singapore for a few other people there. Now, Singapore, you might say, why don't you get somewhere from Australia or America or Israel, which I would, but the rand dollar is the key, because I can't remember who the moil was from Australia, but just say he wanted $1,000 a day, or plus lost expenses, plus this, plus that, where in rands they could give me a lot less, which was a lot more for me. So I was the cheapest. So I did a few in Singapore, which was great, including for Australia. I don't know if you know the Rose, Ricky Rose and Ricky and Gina. Did their son's Bris in Singapore, and from there got into the Chabad network of Asia. That when people wanted a moil, they would adopt a moil, they would ask me. So I got called from the Shaliach in Taiwan. His name's Shlomi Tabib. And he said to me, there's an Israeli family that don't want a Bris, but I convinced them that if I can get a surgeon to come there and do a Bris, but it's a surgeon who does a circumcision, but it's the same as a Bris, that they bought into it. So that was to Taiwan. So I had to fly via Hong Kong. And the weirdest part was that in my ignorance, South Africans don't need a visa for China. And in my ignorance, I thought that China and Taiwan were the same place, same governments. I'm sure most of you will know that. I learned that very harsh lesson when I arrived at the airport. They said to me, where's your visa for Taiwan? I didn't need one for Hong Kong, but I need one for Taiwan. I said, what do you mean? I don't have one. So I phoned the rabbi and I said to him, they stopped me at the airport. So he phoned I don't know who it was, part of foreign affairs in Taiwan, and said to him, there's a baby in Taiwan that needs an operation, and there's no doctor in Taiwan that can do the operation. We have to bring in a doctor from somewhere else, from South Africa, and this baby needs this operation. He's already overdue. He needs it urgently. Every day that passes, is dangerous. So I drove straight from the airport to the Taiwanese consulate, and while I waited, they took photos and did my visa, and then went back to the airport. I could only catch a flight the next day, but I basically spent 4 hours in Taiwan. Flew to Hong Kong, landed in Taiwan at 7 in, did the Bris, and spent 4 hours there. Then went back to the airport, flew via Hong Kong and back. So it's a pity, but I spent only 4 hours in Taiwan doing the Bris there. Feels like a whirlwind.
Gosh. So I mean, now with COVID, obviously your travel has slowed down, I'm assuming.
So I've done it, but I haven't done international for a while. I've done Africa. I've done this year Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe. Been asked to do in Mauritius before, but one of the ones quite close to my heart. I don't know if you knew Rabbi Maisel Zatzal, who was Shoichet Moel Soifer Dayan, an absolute mensch and tzaddik, one of my rabbis and teachers, and he sadly passed away in early this year, not COVID related. And the craziest thing was he was nifta on a Friday morning, and on Motzei Shabbos, I was checking my phone messages. I don't check them very often, but there was a message from him the day before he died. And he said to me in his classic way, hello, Dr. Dean. borders have been locked of Namibia, and there was a baby that's been born. He's now a year old, and he's too old for me to do as the borders are open. He's too old for me to be done as a Bris. He'll need to be done in hospital. And I was wondering if you would go for me to do the Bris in Namibia, please. And he said, okay, I'll phone you before Shabbos. Goodbye. And then he was nifter after that phone call the next morning. So I was extremely emotional getting this, like a dying message now. I sent it to his family. So now the question was, well, I've got to track down this family in Namibia now to do this circumcision, to do this Bris. So I phoned Rabbi Silberhoff. Do you know Rabbi Silberhoff? Have you interviewed him yet? Rabbi Silberhoff.
Yeah, I'm very close to Rabbi.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I phoned Rabbi Silberhoff because he often sends me to these weird and wonderful places to do brisim in Zimbabwe and Botswana and wherever else in close African countries. And I phoned him and he said, okay, I know the head of the shul there. Spoke to the head of the shul, and the head of the shul said to me, there's still a shul, very few Jews there, only I think 15 or 20 males. And then went to phoned the head of the shul. The head of the shul told me he knows the family. It was actually a Brazilian diplomat that was there on, I almost said shlichut. What's the word for like, what would a diplomat do? I don't know, when they get sent there for a few years.
Yeah,
so they're working in the consulate. Apparently there was a big military cooperation, Navy cooperation between Brazil and Namibia. So great, get hold of the people now, but now there's a big problem. I'm not a licensed doctor in Namibia. I don't have an anesthetist, I don't have a hospital, and I don't have a license to practice. So we've got the family, but now we've got a 1-year-old boy. So what I do, I go to Google and I look for the private hospital there, and I just scroll through the list of doctors, looking through the list of doctors, doctor, eventually come up, see a guy, Jonathan Joffe, only Jewish person on the list. Okay, he has to be Jewish. Managed to get, he's an ophthalmologist there, and phone Jonathan Joffe and tell him the story, and he's like blown away by it. And he said, oh, you know what, I actually own my own eye hospital there. I have the operating theaters. You don't have to pay for anything, no medical aid, no license, nothing. Just come in and you can do it in my hospital, which is amazing. And then we found, the head of the shul found out, no one knew, a Yid who hadn't been to shul or connect with the community for over 20 years. His name was Rodney, and he is an anesthetist and the head of the ICU there, and not connected at all to Judaism. But when he heard there was an opportunity, and if we got time on my next story, there's the Yetzer Hara for Bris Milah. Whenever there's a Bris planned or something, everything goes smoothly. Everything just, comes in. Because, a mitzvah that's accepted with happiness and joy is always, will always be celebrated, please God, in happiness and joy. So he was on board. We had an anesthetist, we had a hospital, and we had myself. And I flew out. It's like only, I think it was an hour or two flight from Joburg, and it was during COVID. Got my PCR test and flew over in the morning, got fetched by the head of the shul from the airport to Namibia. And Namibia, the Windhoek looked like a small little African town. We went to this beautiful little day hospital, our hospital, and went and did a Bris for this little boy, a 1-year-old boy in Namibia, and flew back in the afternoon. So that was my. I'm trying to think. I'll be going to Zimbabwe shortly in the next couple of months. I'm trying to think about being to Botswana or where else this year. But I sometimes go to Cape Town and Durban as well to do Brisim. I've done Cape Town and Durban a few times this year as well.
So it's, do you find that like these stories, like you said, these stories attract hashgacha pratit? You just see God's work happening around you.
Yeah, so like even when I was a registrar and working in government, and I would get these brisim like in Singapore, you can imagine no one would believe me at the hospital. If I took 1 day's work leave on the Monday, I flew out on the Sunday, went to Singapore, did the bris, and I was back on work on Tuesday morning. Imagine I told them like I went for 4 hours or 6 hours to Singapore to circumcise a boy and came back. But I feel like I always say to people, I travel with Elio Navu and his chariot, and when there's a bris milah organized, like nothing's there, or when there's there to be done, nothing will stand in my way, and also nothing will stand in like the way physically and practically. There was always like things will come together to allow it to be done.
It's amazing. Now you mentioned we had a quick chat before we came on the Zoom, but you were saying that sometimes even just in your home base, people come to your surgery, to see you as an ENT, and then somehow Brit Miller comes up. Does that happen every now and again?
So it's happened probably 4 or 5 times, and you can explain what the concept of a shaliach is. That I feel that I'm a representative of the Jewish community and of Hashem, and this obviously I didn't know it, but this was, it's an amazing thing to be able to say, that you've been sent to do the right thing in the right place in the right time in life. It's amazing validation. So the first time, it's happened a few times. The first time that happened was unbelievable, because you really feel that that divine intervention, and that you've been personally touched by Hashem, because there's so many things that have happened together. Basically, I run a newborn feeding clinic. I don't know if you know what a tongue tie is. A tongue tie is a small membrane underneath the tongue, and it often needs to be cut to help a child with feeding problems, or so they're able to latch properly. So I see a lot of newborns in my practice, and it was a Friday afternoon. And someone phoned me and they said, hi, this lactation consultant, nursing consultant told me that we need to have our baby's tongue tie cut. Can we come to you? And I don't usually work on late on Friday afternoons. I said to him, okay, sure, we'll do it quickly. And they said, well, we have a circumcision booked in Santon at 4 o'clock. Do you think we'll be done by 3:30 so we can get to Santon at 4? So I said, well, that's fine, but if you want, I run a circumcision clinic as well. So if you want, often I do that on a lot of children. I'll do a tongue tie and a circumcision at the same time. So they arrived at my room. I arrived at my rooms, and they were there waiting. And I walked into my rooms. I'll change the names for the sake in any. What's your wife's name, Rabbi? Sarah.
Yeah, that's right.
Sarah. So we see Daniel and Sarah sitting in the waiting room. I said, what's your name? He said, Daniel. And she said, I'm Sarah too, Jewish names. And I said to them, what are you here for? Oh, are you here for the tongue tie and the circumcision? And I said to them, oh, are you here for a circumcision or a bris? Because then I saw their surname, which was also like Raven, like Goldman or Feldman or something, like a nice Jewish surname. I said, no, we're not here for a bris. Here for a circumcision. Okay, so I knew where they stood. Knew where they came into my rooms, and I did the tongue tie, but actually we realized that the baby, it wasn't the 8th day. There's a problem with brissing a baby before the 8th day. That's actually not considered a bris, and the baby had an eye infection. So I told them, I'm not comfortable to do the circumcision. Let me heal from the tongue tie. Come back on Sunday morning. This was a Friday afternoon, and we'll do the circumcision. So I came back on Sunday morning, and I offered the father. I said to him, do you want to hold the baby during the circumcision? No, he doesn't want anything to do with it. So my wife was there assisting me. So my wife, it's not something that we often do, but it can be. My wife was the Sunday. My wife's had the schuss of being a Sunday 3 times, because I have these crazy brissing where there's no one else. And Baruch Hashem, I've been the Sunday, especially in lockdown now, with just myself and the parents. If there's a non-Jewish father, or sometimes the father doesn't want to do it, I've had the schuss of being the Sunday probably 5 or 6 times. So I do the bris on my lap, some oil in the Sunday. So we did they came in, my wife was a Sunday, and I just said to them, just so that my circumcisions that I do are exactly the same as a bris. So if you want just so that your son knows, one day if he asks you to have a bris, you can tell him yes, he's had a bris, because I do them in the exact same way. So what happened is we did the bris, and I said to the parents, well, do you want me to name him? Like, what's his name? So we'll call him, let's say, what's a nice Solomon and Shmuel. So they said to me his name's going to be Solomon. So I said, well, we can name him Shlomo. So he said, oh, yeah, that's fine. And they left. They didn't even want to be there for a naming ceremony. So my wife and I stood there by ourselves, and we named the child. We named the child Shlomo ben Daniel or something like that. And we named him. And an amazing thing that we brised this kid. Obviously, there was some supernatural power or force avos, maybe there was in the merit of his parents or grandparents, that he managed to have a bris. And the crazy thing was that I got a phone call from the parents like a couple of years later. It was during lockdown last year, that they'd actually had a second boy, and now they wanted to do a bris properly. And I actually drove to their house and did the bris properly for them. Yeah, always in these cases, often I always will buy the little boy a siddur and write in the front of the siddur your name and the baby's name and the date of the bris and my contact details. I had another case, the same, a lady who came from the US Embassy. I do the circumcisions for the US Embassy. She was here also working for the embassy, and she actually told me that she was brought up Jewish but became a Mormon. So she was a practicing Mormon Christian. And but the funniest thing is, she said to me she was quite open to me performing a bris on her son as a bris, even though she was a practicing Mormon. So I did the actual bris with brachot and a ceremony and everything. And the little boy, I gave a siddur to him as well, just saying who he is and what his name was. And she actually named him after her Jewish grandfather. His name was Yosef. So weird cases.
It's just amazing. You see just so many different things that make their way to you, and you don't know how, where, what, or when, but it's all supposed to happen.
Yeah. One of the craziest ones, and it had nothing to do with my practice at all, but it just also showed me that Hashem sent me as like a shaliach, which also I'm not going to get onto immigration at all, but I tell people like I'm on shlichut here, I'm on a duty, I'm a messenger. I can't leave to go anywhere at the moment. But we moved into our house in Glen Hazel, and there was no cell phone signal in our house, nothing. And I was looking on the internet to buy a booster, an antenna, and I found one near the airport in this weird place, like near Kempton Park. I think it was called Highway Gardens. And I arrive at the gate to get this antenna, and a guy comes out in a vest with a massive cross and tattoos all over his body, Portuguese. And he invites me in, and it was done through Facebook Messenger, Facebook Marketplace. So you could see like we had a few mutual friends, and I said to him, how did you have mutual friends? This one's my patient. And he's like, oh no, actually it's through my girlfriend. My girlfriend's actually Jewish, so we've got a few mutual friends. Very nice. Calls out his girlfriend. She comes outside with a big pregnant stomach. Say to her, well, it's nice, what's your name? She introduces herself, and I tell them, he said, what do you do? He says, oh, no, I'm a doctor, and I'm also Moel. Tell them what that is. And he said, that's amazing. We're expecting a boy in the next couple of months, and we didn't know what we were going to do about circumcision. And we sat down. He pulled out some whiskey and a pack of cigars, and I sat down with him, and we sat. I want to say fabrenged, but it was a love deal with fabrenged. We fabrenged, but we became friends. And a couple of months later, I went to the house where I went to buy my cell phone antenna, to go and do the bris for them.
Just when you thought you lost your cell phone reception.
Exactly, in Glen Hazel. It had absolutely nothing. Exactly. And I mean, if that doesn't show you like hashgacha process, or then what else?
That's amazing.
What else is there?
I'm sure there's still many more stories to go into your book one day.
Yeah. So everyone, I mean, I have made a few of them like as audio recordings and that to write them in a book, because it's amazing. I've only been 10 years into Bris Milah, but it just shows you, associated with this mitzvah, how many just the craziness that goes into it. And that's what what people do. We get often from different rabbis here, boys who are 12 turning 13, and the parents are given them the option not to circumcise when they are newborns, and now it comes they rise, their bar mitzvah teacher realizes that they're not brised and they're not circumcised at all. Some of them, at least for their sake, if they circumcised, you can just do a pinprick, hatafa dambrit, which is another story on its own. But they'll come in, and now imagine you were 12 years old, you had like no real connection to Judaism, and now someone tells you you're going to do this circumcision. It's a massive procedure, and you sit down with the boys and you tell them what it's going to be about, and you just show them that you're there for them, care for them, just, show them love, that it's not, there's no agenda or anything, and leave it up to them. And I've had all these, it's happened probably 3 or 4 times that they, one with the Dovi Raven, one with the Eitan Ash, usually the Chabad rabbis bring them to me, and they don't say no. And even we're sitting with the one boy who was having his, and we said to him, what, after this, it's amazing, let's order some takeaways, what should we get? And while he's having his bris milah, his Yetzirah was thinking he wanted, can't remember if it was something with bacon or like pork. So his Yetzirah for bris milah, he couldn't give in to bris milah. He gave into, we said, no, we'll order you some kosher sushi. We got some sushi, but he was dreaming of like this like mamish tray food while he was having his bris milah done.
That's fantastic. Well, look, I mean, I'm sure you could tell us stories all night, but we've coming to sort of the end. If anyone does any further questions, just put them in the chat quickly. But someone did ask in terms of Moalim in Durban and Cape Town. Do they have their own Moalim there?
Yes. So they don't have the Rabbi Zekri in Durban is retired. Rabbi Zekri in Durban has retired, so he'll fly out to Moyle to do a bris there. Cape Town does have Moelim. Rabbi Mazel Zatzal was one there, and Rabbi Sui, he was Nefta. Rabbi Sui's apostle. Rabbi Sui went to Spain, I think, to be a rabbi there. So they have Rabbi Liebenberg, who's a superb Moelim rabbi. I will sometimes go there if some people want Dr. Moyle. There's no Dr. Moyle in Cape Town, but when they always phone me, and usually I'm able to convince them, I tell them to use the Moyle that they have there, who's a superb Moyle. But if I can't convince them, and if they're not going to have a bris, or they want a bris in hospital, then I'll fly out to Cape Town to do it. Otherwise, there are a lot of friends from Joburg, or acquaintances from Joburg, who've moved down to Cape Town, so I'll fly out for them as well.
Amazing. Well, look, we look forward to, please God, inviting you back here. Hopefully not because of lockdown, but to hear some more stories.
If you want, I'll send you, you can send your community. There was a Jewish magazine here that wrote an article on a few of the bris stories in my rooms. I'll send you the link. It's online. You can send it out, and
I'd love to do that.
They can read it.
Well, look, thank you so much, Dean, and appreciate you sharing your stories, telling us about what it means to be a Moyle, and of course you've got your whole your ENT world that you do stuff. So
yes,
fascinating. You combine the two worlds together in a way,
Yeah, you have to bring, the kedusha, the holiness into the mundane and I'm a shaliach or a messenger or an agent in both sides, whether it's in bris milah or whether it's in medicine, in ENT, to be a kiddush Hashem and to try and help people and heal people, and to be a shaliach for refuah, an agent to help people get better.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you everybody for joining us, and again a big thank you to Dean for
thank you.
This just coming up obviously before Shabbat, we'll be having our pre-Kabbalat Shabbat or pre-Shabbat Kabbalat Shabbat service with Cousin Greg and myself. And next week, a couple other talks coming up, so stay tuned to our Facebook page or our website. And look, Dean, wish you all the best in your shlichut.
Do you think I can? Thank you. Do you think I could get to Melbourne to do a bris? Would you shmuchel it for me? If B'Shatava, there's one of my cousins coming.
I don't even think they're letting in the press.
I
don't even think they're letting the
I know that.
States in this country.
I know you're allowed out. Maybe we can meet maybe we can do it in Thailand or something. We'll see. Yeah. Maybe, but then they won't let you back in. No, it's hard. Or we can do it over Zoom. Someone suggested to me the other day, the old computers with a CD drive. I can press the CD drive if you can put the thing in the right place, and it can chop it off at the right time. We just have some supervision.
Give me a scalpel and you can talk me through it,
That's fine. That's fine. I'm used to it, actually. Okay, thank you for hosting me, and thanks to Michael for suggesting.
Thank you.